The snow had been falling since noon, and by 9 o'clock it had erased the dividing line between the road and the sidewalk. Daniel Carter drove home the long way, not because he wanted to, but because the shortcut off Milford Avenue was blocked by a city plow that had given up halfway through its job. His hands were still dirty from the last call of the day, a busted heat exchanger in a duplex on the east side, and the cab of his truck smelled like scorched metal and old coffee. He was tired in the particular way that comes from doing necessary things for people who can't always pay on time. His boots were wet through. Noah would be asleep by now, tucked in at his own mother. Margaret, which meant the house would be quiet and there would be no reason to rush. He almost missed her. She was tucked into the collapsed corner of a bus shelter at the intersection of Grant and Fifth. One shoulder pressed against the fractured plexiglass, her legs drawn up beneath a coat that was not heavy enough for this kind of cold. The overhead light inside the shelter had been dark for weeks. If there hadn't been a white pickup idling at the red light across the street, its headlights sweeping the corner at just the right angle, he wouldn't have seen her at all. Daniel pulled over. He sat for a moment. He thought about Noah. He thought about his 5:30 alarm and the Hendricks job he had in the morning. Then, he got out of the truck. She was unconscious, or close to it. Her lips had gone pale, and her breath came in slow, shallow pulls that worried him more than anything else. He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist and felt a pulse that was there but didn't inspire confidence. Her hands were bare. She had no gloves. "Hey," he said. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened halfway. Blue eyes. She looked at him without alarm, which itself was alarming, a sign the cold had already done its work on her judgment. "I'm going to pick you up," he said. "Is that okay?" She didn't answer. He picked her up anyway. Martha's Diner was 4 blocks east and open all night. He carried her through the door, and the woman at the counter, a broad-shouldered woman named Ruth who had run the overnight shift for 11 years, took one look and pointed to the booth nearest the kitchen without saying a word. Ruth brought blankets from the back room, the ones kept for drunk college students and weather emergencies, and hot broth in a ceramic mug, and she did not ask questions. The woman's name, she said when she was warm enough to say anything, was Elena. Daniel Carter was 37 years old and owned a truck, a set of tools, and a house on Clement Street that needed a new roof he kept putting off because something more urgent always came first. He had started Carter HVAC 8 years ago with a used van and a handshake arrangement with a supply warehouse on the edge of town. Now he had 2 employees, a decent reputation, and a waiting list that stretched into March. His wife, Renee, had left 4 years ago. Not dramatically, there had been no single argument that ended things, no discovered secret or final betrayal. She had simply arrived at the conclusion that the life she wanted was not available on Clement Street, and she had gone to find it elsewhere. She sent postcards from Portland for a while, then the postcards stopped. Noah had been 4 years old. He did not remember her, which Daniel counted as one of the few mercies he had been granted. He had cried about it exactly once, on a Thursday night 6 months after she left, after Noah had gone to sleep and the house was very quiet. He had sat in the kitchen with his hands flat on the table and let it happen. Then he had washed his face and gone to bed and gotten up at 5 the next morning and made pancakes. He did not believe in extended performances of grief, not because he thought grief was invalid, but because Noah needed a father who was present, and being present required getting up. Their mornings had a structure that Noah, at 8, had come to treat as sacred. Alarm at 5. Pancakes from scratch because the mix from a box was something Daniel's own father had called a compromise with mediocrity. A glass of milk filled to the pencil line Noah had drawn on the side of the measuring cup during a science phase that had lasted 3 weeks and permanently altered the cup's usefulness for any other purpose. Backpack check. Boot check. The walk to the bus stop, which Noah did not need assistance with, but which Daniel made anyway, because he understood that the window for unnecessary accompaniment was shorter than it appeared. That same week, before the snow, Daniel had turned down a job. A property management company had offered him a contract to service the heating systems in 17 commercial buildings across the district. Good money, regular money, the kind of money that could fix the roof. The catch was a line item in the contract that required him to log maintenance checks as completed even when access to certain units had been denied by tenants. The property manager had explained this patiently, as if it were simply how things worked. Daniel had declined. The property manager had seemed genuinely puzzled. Noah knew nothing about this. But Daniel operated on the belief that Noah saw everything, not the specifics, but the shape of things. Children understood integrity the way they understood weather, not as a concept but as a physical condition they lived inside. The shelter on Archer Street had a sign on the door. Capacity reached weather emergency overflow in effect. There were 8 people standing outside it in the snow, waiting. Daniel drove past it and went home. Elena slept on the couch under 2 blankets and did not wake until noon the following day. By then, Noah was home from school and had already decided she was his responsibility. He brought her a glass of water without being asked. He told her the rules of the house, which he delivered with the gravity of someone who has spent considerable time curating them. Shoes by the door, no loud voices before 8 in the morning, and the remote control lived on the right side of the couch cushion and was returned there after use. "What's your bear's name?" Elena asked, looking at the stuffed animal sitting upright on the armchair across the room. "Scout," Noah said. "Is Scout yours?" "He used to be mine. Now he kind of belongs to whoever needs him." He picked the bear up and brought it to her with both hands. The way you hand someone something that matters. When someone's cold, Scout keeps them brave. Daniel, standing in the kitchen doorway, said nothing. Elena stayed a week. Then the week became 2. By small increments and without formal announcement. She helped with the dishes. She read to Noah in the evenings when Daniel was still working. She did not talk about herself, and Daniel did not push. He had made a decision, without quite articulating it, that whatever she was running from was her business until she chose otherwise. She had a phone. He noticed it on the 3rd night, a late-model device that was plainly not consistent with the rest of her appearance. She used it only in the kitchen, after Noah was asleep, speaking in a low voice. He did not listen. What he noticed instead was smaller. She folded her blankets in the morning without being asked. She noticed when the dish soap ran low and wrote it on the grocery notepad on the refrigerator door. When she read to Noah, she used different voices for different characters. And Noah's responses, the specific, involuntary laughter that he couldn't produce on command, told Daniel she was good at it. Not performing goodness. Actually good. The week she spent in Daniel's house, Elena Hawthorne learned things she had not learned in the previous 12 years of running a company. She learned that a person could build a meaningful life with very little excess. She learned that a child's laughter at a badly told joke was a specific and irreplaceable sound. She learned that a man who told his son the truth, even inconvenient truths, even the truth that some jobs didn't come through and some months were tighter than others, was doing something quietly extraordinary. She had grown up in houses where staff managed the practical dimensions of daily life. Her father, the original Hawthorne, had understood that money was an insulation layer, that enough of it could protect you from the friction of the ordinary world. He had not meant this cruelly. He had meant it as a gift. But what Elena had discovered, over years of running the company he left her, was that the insulation also kept you from understanding what you were actually building. The data said the housing initiatives were working. The street said something more complicated. At night, after the house went still, she spoke with Clara Bennett, her chief of staff, in whispers. The situation at Hawthorne Group had grown more urgent. Victor Lang, the company's vice president of acquisitions, had been positioning himself for months. The board's confidence in Elena's leadership had been eroding since the 3rd quarter figures, and Victor had been working the phone lines with the patience of someone who believes time is on his side. There were 2 board members who had not yet declared. "You need to come back," Clara said. "The vote is in 10 days. "I know. Where are you?" "Somewhere I needed to be." Elena had not planned for the stay to last 2 weeks. She had intended to spend 3 days in the city's shelters and lower-income neighborhoods, conducting the kind of first-hand research that no consultant's report could replicate. She had been doing this periodically for 6 years, checking the assumptions of her company's affordable housing initiatives against the reality of what it was like to need them. She kept it private because the moment it became public, the exercise became theater. She had not planned to be caught in a blizzard. She had not planned for the bus shelter roof to give way. She had not planned for Daniel Carter. On the day before she left, a neighbor named Phyllis stopped Elena on the front walk and asked, with a neighborly indirection that failed to conceal direct curiosity, how long she intended to stay. Elena said she wasn't sure. Phyllis smiled with her mouth and not her eyes and went inside. That evening, Elena overheard Phyllis talking to someone on her phone through the thin wall between the properties, and caught the words, "strange woman," and "doesn't seem like she belongs." She packed her things that night. She left before 5 in the morning, when the snow was coming down again and the street was empty. She left a note on the kitchen counter, weighted down with the sugar bowl. It said, "Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't explain. I hope the Hendricks job went well. E." She had taken Scout by accident. The bear had been sitting on the couch arm beside her things, and she had gathered everything in the dark without thinking. She didn't realize until she was 3 blocks away and did not go back. She told herself she would return him. Noah found the note at 6:15 when he came downstairs for breakfast. He stood at the counter and read it twice. He folded it carefully and held it. He did not cry. "Where did she go?" he asked. "I don't know, Bud." Noah was quiet through breakfast. He ate his pancakes with the focused attention of someone conserving energy for a more important task. He had not touched Scout's usual spot on the armchair. He seemed to understand already that the bear wasn't there, and he was giving the absence its proper weight. Then, as he was pulling on his boots, he said, "Dad, do people always leave?" The question found the exact place in Daniel's chest where Renee had left a gap 4 years ago, and he felt the familiar pressure there, the one he'd learned to breathe around. "Not always," he said. "But sometimes. Is it because of us?" "No, it's because of them." He crouched down to Noah's level. Not everything that leaves is gone. Some things just go somewhere else for a while. Noah considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then he picked up his backpack and they walked to the bus stop. The envelope arrived 11 days later. It was heavy cream paper with the Hawthorne Group letterhead embossed at the top. A tower with clean vertical lines that Daniel had seen many times on the north end of downtown without ever associating it with a name. Inside was a single card. It read, "Mr. Carter, I would like to thank you properly. Please come to Hawthorne Tower at your convenience. Ask for Clara Bennett at reception. E. Hawthorne." He went on a Thursday afternoon after the Hendricks job and before picking up Noah. He wore his good shirt, the blue Oxford he kept for occasions that required more than a work jacket, and drove downtown. Hawthorne Tower was 52 floors of glass and steel, and the lobby was the kind of space designed to communicate that the people who worked here operated at a level you had not yet considered. Clara Bennett met him at reception. She was a precise, watchful woman in her 40s, who shook his hand firmly and led him to an elevator without small talk. On the 52nd floor, the doors opened to a view of Northbridge that included, somewhere below and to the east, Clement Street. The name was on the wall in brushed steel letters 3 inches high. Elena Hawthorne, Chief Executive Officer, Hawthorne Group. She came out of the conference room in a black suit. Her posture was different from the woman on his couch, upright, precise, calibrated. But the eyes were the same blue. She extended her hand. "Mr. Carter." He shook it. He looked at the wall. He looked at her. "I see," he said. The view from up here was one he had never considered from this angle. He could see the industrial corridor where the Hendricks job was, the older residential blocks east of Millbrook, the bus shelter at Grant and Fifth that still had its light out. From 52 floors up, the city looked organized and purposeful. Down there, in the cold, it was something else. He didn't sit when she offered him a chair. He stood near the window with the city spread below him and said nothing for a long moment. "I wasn't deceiving you for sport," she said. "I conduct these visits periodically. I want to understand what our housing programs actually produce at street level. who they reach, who they miss. That's a good reason, he said. It doesn't change what happened. She accepted this without argument, which he noted. He left after 20 minutes. He drove home without the radio on. The story broke on a Tuesday. Daniel didn't see it coming because he had no reason to anticipate it. A photographer who had been working a piece on Northbridge's shelter crisis had captured Elena arriving at Hawthorne Tower one morning, recognized her from the circulation that had been given to the building's security team, and cross-referenced her with the photographs that had surfaced from 2 weeks earlier street-level shots taken from across Grant and Fifth. Daniel carrying a woman through the snow. By noon, the headline was everywhere. Hawthorne CEO spent 2 weeks homeless rescued by local HVAC worker. By 3 o'clock, there was a news van parked in front of the house on Clement Street. Daniel did not answer the door. He called his mother, who drove over and stayed with Noah. He fielded calls from 2 different morning programs, declined both, and turned his phone off by 6. Noah came home from school the following day with a look on his face that Daniel had never seen before. It was not exactly sadness. It was more like the expression of someone who has been handed information they did not ask for, and are not sure what to do with it. Marcus Ellison said you trapped a billionaire. Marcus Ellison is wrong. He said she stayed here because she wanted to study us, like we were an experiment. Daniel sat down at the kitchen table. Noah sat across from him. What do you think? Daniel asked. Noah took a moment. I think Scout misses his house. Daniel almost smiled. Yeah, I think he might. The board at Hawthorne Group had instructed Elena, through a carefully worded message from their communications team, to characterize her visits as a formal social research initiative. A structured program, language that would transform a private habit of conscience into a corporate optics strategy. Victor Lang, whose support within the board had grown in direct proportion to Elena's visibility problems, was being very quiet in the way that precedes action. Elena read the communications team's language 3 times and then set it aside. She called Daniel's number 4 days after the story broke. He picked up on the 4th ring. I'd like to talk, she said. Not at the tower, somewhere neutral. He named a place called Fenn Street Coffee that was small and consistently overlooked, tucked between a dry cleaner and a hardware store 2 miles from downtown. They met on a Saturday morning. The place was half full and nobody paid them particular attention. Daniel ordered black coffee. Elena ordered the same. I want to tell you that I'm sorry, she said. Not for being in that shelter, not for the work I was doing, but for disappearing the way I did, and for what it cost your son. Noah's resilient, Daniel said. That's not the same as it not mattering. He accepted this. Why didn't you tell me? Because the moment people know who I am, they stop acting like themselves. You were the first person in a long time who treated me like a person without any particular agenda. I didn't want to lose that. That's honest, he said. It's also a little convenient. She didn't argue. Yes, it is. He looked at his coffee for a moment. I helped you because you were human, because you were cold and in trouble and I happened to be there. That's all it was. I didn't need it to be a transaction. I know. She looked at him steadily. That's exactly why it mattered. That's what I was trying to find. And did you? A pause. Yes, and then I left before I could figure out what to do with it. He stood to go. He put on his jacket. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said, without turning around. Noah asked about you. He wants to know if you're all right. He pushed through the door. The cold came in briefly, and then the door closed behind him. Elena sat with her coffee for another 20 minutes. She had not cried in a meeting in 11 years. She did not cry now, but something in her chest rearranged itself, and she was aware of its new position all the way back to the tower. It was Noah who changed things, not intentionally, but in the way that children change things by asking a question that strips away the architecture adults construct around their decisions. Is she bad? He asked. On a Sunday morning, when there was nothing on the stove yet, and the light through the kitchen window was the blue-gray of early winter. Daniel considered the question seriously, because Noah deserved serious answers. "No," he said finally. "She made some choices that weren't fair to us. That's different from being bad. Are you going to stay mad?" "I'm working on that. Because if you stay mad," Noah said, with the careful logic of an 8-year-old who has been thinking about something for several days, "then you have to carry it everywhere. And that makes you tired. You told me that." Daniel stared at his son. "I said that? About Marcus Ellison." Last year when he said my drawing was stupid, he remembered. He had said something like that, in a different form, standing at the kitchen sink with suds on his hands. He had not expected it to be filed away and retrieved as testimony. He called Elena that afternoon. They met 3 days later at Martha's diner. Ruth brought coffee without being asked, and then made herself scarce with the discretion of someone who understood when to be invisible. "I'm not forgiving you because you deserve it," Daniel said. "I'm forgiving you because I don't want Noah to grow up watching me hold on to grudges. He's learning how to do this. I need to do it right." Elena nodded. She had not expected generosity, and she did not pretend otherwise. "I want to do something real," she said. "Not a press release. Not a corporate program with a logo. Something that actually works." "Like what?" She laid out what she had been drafting in her own time, separate from anything the board had sanctioned. A community housing fund, managed independently, that would subsidize repair and maintenance for single-income households in the city's older residential neighborhoods. Not construction repair. The kind of work that kept a family in a house they already had. The kind of work that Daniel did every day. An attached program would support single-parent families with emergency expenses, structured not as charity but as a low-interest pool with no credit check requirement. "The board won't like it," she said. "Victor especially. He's been pushing to liquidate 3 of our residential properties for commercial development." "What are you going to do?" "Tell the truth. In the meeting. About what the visits were. Why I did them. What I found." She met his eyes. "I'm going to say your name. If that's all right with you." He thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "That's all right." The board meeting was 3 days later. Elena presented the housing initiative with the same precision she brought to any proposal, but without the protective language the communications team had drafted. She spoke plainly about what she had seen and where she had been. She named the shelter on Archer Street. She named Martha's Diner. She said that the company's affordable housing data and the reality of affordable housing in Northbridge were 2 different things, and that she intended to close the gap. There was a silence after she finished that lasted long enough to be meaningful. One of the board members, a man named Arthur Greaves, who had been on the board since Elena's father's time and who rarely spoke during presentations, said, "How much have we allocated to programs that we've never actually visited?" Nobody answered. The question sat in the room. Victor Lang spoke against the proposal for 11 minutes. 2 board members had been wavering. After his 11 minutes, one of them voted with Elena. The initiative passed by a margin of 1. Victor submitted his resignation 4 days later. The center opened on a Tuesday in late spring, when the snow was long gone and the maple trees along Millbrook Avenue had come back in earnest. It occupied a former warehouse at the edge of the Garfield neighborhood, 3 blocks from the bus line, 2 blocks from an elementary school. The sign above the door was simple: Northbridge Community Center Carter Hawthorne Housing Initiative. Daniel ran the operations, side intake, contractor coordination, the repair assessments that matched families with workers from a vetted local network. He had kept his own business. This was additional, and the structure of it had been designed carefully enough that it did not require him to choose. 2 afternoons a week and full days on Saturdays, when his schedule allowed. Elena oversaw the fund itself, alongside a 3-person advisory board that included Clara, a housing attorney named Bridget Forsyth, who had done pro bono work in the district for a decade, and a retired city planner named Howard Tanner, who knew where every zoning anomaly in Northbridge was buried and why. She attended the center's weekly intake sessions in person when she could, without a security detail and without advance notice to the press. Margaret Carter came on Wednesdays. She brought sandwiches and sat with families in the waiting area, which she had correctly identified as the place where most of the real anxiety lived, and talked to people with the easy warmth of someone who had raised a son by herself for 3 years after his father's death and understood what it meant to manage a household on uncertain income. Nobody knew whose mother she was until her 3rd week, when Daniel introduced her to the program director, and the program director mentioned it to someone, and after that it didn't seem to matter. Noah came on Saturdays. He had decided, with the unilateral confidence particular to 8-year-olds who have thought something through completely, that the center needed a mascot. He had given this considerable thought. He had arrived at his conclusion the way he arrived at most conclusions, by asking the right question, which in this case was, what do people need when they're scared and don't know what comes next? On the 3rd Saturday, he brought Scout. He placed the bear on the reception desk with both hands, the same way he had delivered him in the house on Clement Street 5 months earlier. He had made a small card that he leaned against the bear's left arm. It read, in his careful 2nd-grade printing, "When you're cold, borrow Scout." The receptionist, a young woman named Daria, who had started the week before and was still learning the intake software, looked at the card and then at Noah and said, "Does he come back?" "Yeah," Noah said. "He always comes back." Elena arrived that Saturday at 10:30. She had driven herself. She stood in the entryway for a moment and saw Scout on the reception desk, the card leaning against his arm, and she was very still for a moment, in the way you are still when something is exactly what it should be. Daniel was at the far end of the room, going through intake files with a contractor named Preston who was trying to schedule 3 jobs into a 2-week window. He looked up when Elena came in. He didn't wave. She didn't wave, but something passed between them that was accurate and unhurried, the kind of recognition that doesn't need punctuation. Later, when the morning's work was done and the center had emptied out for lunch, the 4 of them sat in the small break room. Daniel, Elena, Noah, and Margaret with sandwiches and coffee, and nobody said anything particularly important, which was itself important. Noah told a joke about a penguin that had no logical structure and an ending that required explanation. Margaret laughed anyway, the full kind. Daniel shook his head. Elena laughed. Not the careful, managed kind she produced in conference rooms. The other kind. Outside, Northbridge was in full spring, and the light came through the break room's single window at a low angle that caught the dust in the air and made it look briefly like something precious. Noah had finished his sandwich and was drawing on a paper napkin with a pen he had found in his jacket pocket. He drew a house, then another, then a whole street of them, each one slightly different from the last. Daniel watched him draw and thought about what he knew to be true, that kindness, offered without expectation of return, is not a loss. That forgiveness is not absolution, it is a decision about what you carry forward. That the measure of what you teach a child is not in the lessons you deliver, but in the life they watch you live. He had not set out to teach any of this. He had set out to drive home on a cold night and get some sleep before a 5:30 alarm. He had pulled over because there was a woman alone in the cold, and he happened to be the person who saw her. That was the whole story. Or the beginning of it. What came after was not something he had planned or earned or deserved. It had simply been what happened when you did the ordinary thing and didn't look away. He reached over and stole a corner of Noah's napkin and drew a small bear in the margin. "Scout," Noah said, without looking up. "Scout," Daniel agreed. The light shifted. Margaret started collecting plates. Elena refilled the coffee without asking. Outside, 2 children ran past the center's window chasing something the adults couldn't see, and their footsteps made no sound through the glass, but their movement was unmistakably joyful. Noah watched them go. Then he looked down at his napkin and kept drawing.